In December of 1818, high in the Austrian Alps, two very ordinary men were about to make history. Father Joseph Moore, a 26-year-old parish priest at St. Nicholas Church in the village of Oberndorf, and his friend Franz Gruber, a school teacher and organist, shared a deep love for the music of the Christmas season. Gruber and Moore often spent long hours discussing the merits of their favorite Christmas carols and had come to the conclusion that the perfect Christmas song was still waiting to be composed. Neither man had any idea that they were about to create it themselves. A few days before Christmas, Father Moore received word that the wife of a woodcutter living outside of Oberndorf had recently given birth to a son. The next morning, the priest made the long walk to the family's cabin, where he offered a blessing for the newborn child. Late that afternoon, as Moore journeyed back to Oberndorf, he paused to reflect on all that he had seen and experienced. The priest marveled at the quiet beauty of the Austrian countryside he had traveled through that day. He also rejoiced in the love and happiness inspired by the infant child he had blessed. Then, in his imagination, he envisioned the birth of another baby boy, 18 centuries earlier, on a pure and holy night, when God reached down and touched the world with his Son. As Moore looked out over the deafening silence of the snow, he sensed, as never before, that the Savior of the world had been born in a moment of perfect serenity and holiness.
In purity and peace, Jesus entered the world, and God became man to dwell among us.
When he reached home, the cold chill that filled his study could not dampen his enthusiasm. And in a burst of inspiration, Moore penned the lyrics to the only song he would ever write. It was a song that would capture the essence of the beauty and wonder that surrounded the miracle of Christ's birth. A song that began with the now immortal words, Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht, Silent Night, Holy Night. In less than 4 hours, Moore finished 6 stanzas. His first thought was to share the song with his congregation at midnight mass on Christmas Eve. But the church organ was silenced, its bellows badly damaged, and the repairman he had written to months earlier could not come to Oberndorf until after Christmas. Yet Father Moore had promised special music to his congregation, and it was a promise he intended to keep.
Liebe Freund im Glauben,
Though our organ is broken, do not despair. Each December, we look forward to the beautiful music of Christmas Eve. And I believe that this year will be like all the rest. Music of great joy will fill our church and our hearts.
With no organ for accompaniment, Moore prayed for an alternative. And for the second time in less than a week, inspiration touched the young priest. In his excitement, he rushed from the church to Franz Gruber's house and presented his lyrics to his friend.
And when he wrote these words and brought them to Gruber, As they coordinated their talents and abilities, Gruber is evidently supposed to have said that this is it. Father, we now have the song we've been looking for. And I guess judging by its history since then and its acceptance, we'd have to say that's right.
Moore had not only written lyrics to the perfect Christmas carol, he had also formulated an idea that would transform the broken organ into a blessing in disguise. He asked Gruber to create a musical arrangement for a Christmas Eve performance, not on keyboard, but guitar. Franz went to work immediately and composed a beautifully simple three-chord melody.
I sometimes feel that the organ being out of repair was almost providential. If the organ had been used for these simple words, we probably would have lost so much. It would have been too profound. But the simplicity of that guitar, three little simple chords, a little simple melody, fits so perfectly the tenderness and the warmth of Joseph Moore's original words.
And so he put the melody, very simple, did it beautifully, keeping in mind that it had to be sung by the people. And he was right. He was able to put that formula together, and lo and behold, Silent Night has lived and keeps right on living.
Today, all that remains of Father Moore's St. Nicholas Church are these foundation stones. In its place, a memorial chapel commemorates his collaboration with Franz Gruber and the remarkable Christmas Eve of 1818. The following spring, the repairman finally arrived in Oberndorf, fixed the organ, and took the carol with him off the mountain to his own town, where it was enthusiastically embraced. And in the years that followed, Silent Night became the favorite of both peasants and kings, touching countless lives through translations into more than 120 languages, as its power and popularity spread throughout the earth, while celebrating the simple masterpiece of a young priest and a school teacher, who by necessity and inspiration composed the perfect Christmas carol.
It's the one hymn that brings a smile to more people than any other hymn we announce. And they say, oh yes, we must hear that. We can have a concert of music for an hour and a half or 2 hours. If we haven't sung How Great Thou Art, somebody's going to go home and say, but they didn't sing How Great Thou Art. But if we sing it, even just one verse at the end, they feel the evening's complete. And that's the way I feel about it too.
While some hymns were written in a moment of inspiration, the creation of How Great Thou Art followed a much longer winding path. For it is the masterwork of at least 2 authors and more than 50 years of heartfelt experiences. On a summer afternoon in 1885, Carl Boberg, a 26-year-old Swedish pastor, was returning from a hike in the countryside. While he was still a few miles from home, a thunderstorm broke on the horizon. Taking refuge in an abandoned farmhouse, Boberg watched in awe at the spectacular display of God's power.
The storm unleashed the full force of its power, with driving rain and great peals of thunder. Then, after an hour, the skies cleared as quickly as they had first darkened. A rainbow arched gracefully, and a clean breeze blew softly through the fields. When I arrived home, the lake outside my window was like a mirror. The song of a thrush lifted from the woods, and a church bell sounded in the distance. I fell to my knees in humble praise to the God who held all of creation in his hands.
That evening, Carl Boberg, still deeply moved by the beauty and power of all he had experienced, wrote a poem he entitled, O Storgud, O Great God. The following week, he read the poem in his church and later published it in a local periodical. Much to his surprise, its popularity spread throughout Sweden as it was sung to the tune of a traditional folk melody. In 1907, Boberg's poem, now turned hymn, was translated into German. Then 20 years later, a Russian version was published. Yet, it wasn't until Stuart Hine, a British missionary, heard the song in a small Ukrainian village that a remarkable chain of events resulting in the hymn's enormous worldwide impact would be set into motion.
He was captured with the music because of the particular areas that he was there in Europe. And he was just thrilled. And then one song particularly that the young people sang, particularly when they were out on hikes and things like that, they sang this song and he just loved it and loved it.
The people would sing the hymn together as they walked through the forest and mountain trails. Its words seemed to carry to heaven, triumphant and full of joy. I was captivated by its message and set my heart to one day compose an English version of this beautiful song of praise.
Like Carl Boberg, Stuart Hine was inspired by the natural splendor of God's creation. The first stanzas of his English rendition flowed easily from his heart.
O Lord, my God, when I, in awesome wonder, consider all the works thy hands have made. I see the stars, I hear the mighty thunder, thy power throughout the universe displayed.
During the next few years, the hymn stayed alive in Hein's imagination as he preached and distributed Bibles throughout Czechoslovakia and the Ukraine. Yet as his ministry expanded, he became increasingly aware that though the people he encountered in these remote mountain villages had a deep sense of appreciation for God's creative power, they knew almost nothing of his greatest gift to each of them. One day, the missionary watched in amazement as an elderly woman picked up a Bible and slowly read the account of Christ's crucifixion to a group of her friends.
It was a moment I will never forget. As she read, people fell to their knees, crying out to God in prayer, thanking Him for sacrificing His only Son on their behalf. In that wonderful instant, they understood, for the first time in their lives, the true magnitude of their Creator's love for each of them.
Stuart Hein wrote the third stanza to the hymn a few days later.
And when I think that God, His Son not sparing, sent Him to die, I scarce can take it in.